The tension in the room was palpable. The hearing had been going on for hours, filled with rehearsed talking points and political grandstanding. But then came a pause, short, sharp, and deliberate. That's when the senator leaned forward, calm, and unbothered with that Louisiana drawl that disarms before it cuts. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words did the heavy lifting. You want truth, Congressman? Start by looking in the mirror. There was no need to shout, no theatrics, just a quiet line that dropped like a hammer in a room full of people who thought they'd heard it all. It wasn't just a question, it was a challenge. Not to ideology, not to party loyalty, but to character. That's what made it lethal. Because in politics, facts are often twisted. Statistics can be manipulated, but character? That's the one thing you either have or you don't. The moment was personal, but not emotional. It was precise, calculated. The kind of thing you say when you've been waiting patiently for someone to stop spinning long enough for you to strike. The senator didn't accuse anyone of anything. He just invited a moment of reflection. A mirror, figuratively speaking, was placed in front of a man who had spent years pointing fingers at opponents, at voters, at anyone but himself. And that's what made the moment so unforgettable. Because it wasn't a lecture, it was a reminder. A reminder that truth isn't owned by the loudest voice in the room, or the one with the most airtime. Truth isn't written in committee notes or drafted in back rooms. It reveals itself in consistency, in how someone behaves when the cameras are off, in whether the standards they hold others to apply equally to themselves. The senator knew that. That's why the line landed so hard. It wasn't an insult. It was a mirror held up at just the right angle to show every contradiction. Not with malice, but with surgical intent. See, you can evade questions, you can deflect, you can pivot to talking points or accuse your critics of playing politics, but you can't argue with your own reflection. That's why the room got quiet. That's why even the press looked up from their laptops. Because everyone in that moment saw what the senator saw, an opportunity to drop the mask and deal with the core issue. And the core issue wasn't just about political opinions or differing worldviews. It was about the erosion of trust. The kind that doesn't get repaired by press releases or cable news interviews. The kind that requires something deeper: honesty, humility, and accountability. The senator didn't expect a confession. He didn't need one. The power of his words was that they required no response. Because in the absence of one, everything was said. The silence that followed was the real answer. The unwillingness to look inward, to own up, to reflect. That was the clearest admission of all. For a moment, all the noise faded. The partisan bickering, the rehearsed outrage, the made-for-TV moments, they all took a backseat to something raw and real. It was clarity, brief but unmistakable. The kind of clarity that doesn't come from yelling louder or doubling down. It comes from someone daring to tell the truth plainly, and that's why it stung. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true. There's a moment in every hearing when the spotlight shifts, not because someone raises their voice, but because a simple question slices through the fog. That was the moment this senator leaned in, eyes steady, voice low. You've lied before. Why should America believe you now? It was a question that didn't need elaboration, no long-winded speech, no dramatic pause. Just 7 words that packed years of frustration, disillusionment, and clarity. And it wasn't the kind of question that begged for a political answer. It demanded something more. Something almost extinct in the world of sound bites and spin. Accountability. That one line pulled back the curtain on a long pattern. There had been grand claims before, sweeping accusations made in front of cameras, predictions that never panned out, and statements that later had to be quietly walked back. And yet, with every new controversy, the same figure reappeared, acting, as if the past had been wiped clean, as if no one remembered. But America remembered. They remembered the closed-door meetings. They remembered the promises of bombshell evidence that never materialized. They remembered the carefully edited leaks that stirred outrage, only to fizzle when the full context was finally revealed. And now, sitting across from someone who had played that game one too many times, the senator didn't waste time with niceties. He just asked the one thing the country had been thinking. Because trust isn't something you can rebuild on a whim. Once it's broken, especially in the public eye, it leaves a scar. People may forget the exact details of every claim, but they remember how it made them feel. They remember being misled again and again, only to be told it was for their own good. And when someone keeps moving the goalposts, eventually people stop playing the game. That's why the question hit so hard. It wasn't just rhetorical, it was rooted in years of receipts, public records, televised statements, contradictory interviews. It was all there. And the senator wasn't just speaking to the person in front of him. He was speaking to the millions, watching who'd had enough of the gaslighting, the arrogance, and the manufactured drama. What made the moment so powerful wasn't just the content, it was the delivery. Calm, composed, with a trace of Southern grit. He didn't raise his voice or mock. He just put the question out there and let it hang. And that silence, it said more than any shouting match ever could. Because when you've been caught too many times, when your credibility has eroded to the point that even your allies wince at your speeches, there's nothing left to hide behind. No press team can spin away that kind of exposure. No statement can clean up what's already been baked into the public consciousness. At some point, people stop listening to what you're saying and start watching how you react when the truth shows up. And, in this case, the reaction said it all. No direct answer, no ownership, just deflection, discomfort, a familiar pattern repeating itself, one that the senator knew all too well. And maybe that's why the question landed with such finality, because it wasn't about scoring political points or outshining the cameras. It was about forcing a moment of clarity. In politics, people rarely get the opportunity to confront their reputations head-on. Most drift through controversies, issuing vague denials and hoping the next news cycle washes the slate clean. But every now and then someone stops the wheel, forces the issue, asks the one thing everyone's been afraid to say out loud. That day, it wasn't a prosecutor speaking. It wasn't a pundit or a journalist. It was a senator speaking for millions of Americans who were done playing along, who were tired of being told one thing, only to find out later they'd been misled. Again. So when that question dropped, "You've lied before. Why should America believe you now?" It wasn't just an inquiry. It was a verdict, one that didn't need a gavel or a headline, just a simple. The contrast was striking. On one side, polished indignation and carefully rehearsed outrage. On the other, calm precision. A man with no need to yell because the facts were already screaming. This wasn't a debate in the traditional sense. No points were being traded, no clever rebuttals prepared in advance. It was something much more surgical, much more final. It was an execution, slow, deliberate, and rooted in the undeniable. There's a certain rhythm to political grandstanding. Everyone knows the script. One side throws out loaded accusations, the other responds with qualifiers, and somewhere in the middle, the truth gets buried under talking points. But not this time. The senator didn't play into the drama. He didn't roll his eyes, didn't try to match volume. He simply laid out the facts, one after another, with a steadiness that couldn't be shaken. There's a unique kind of silence that comes when someone speaks with so much clarity that even the loudest in the room have no retort. It's not the silence of agreement, it's the silence of defeat. As he began, there was no dramatic pause, no sweeping gestures, just a steady unraveling of a narrative that had been carefully constructed and repeatedly fed to the public. The facts spoke louder than any insult ever could. Each point was a step deeper. Not random criticisms or political whataboutism, but a methodical breakdown of contradictions, hypocrisies, and self-inflicted wounds. No personal attacks, no need to raise the temperature. The senator understood the most powerful argument is one the other side has already made, when their own record becomes the evidence against them. That's what made it so devastating. It wasn't what he said, it's that he didn't have to say much. All he had to do was point, connect the dots, and let the truth do the heavy lifting. Every time a previous statement was exposed as hollow, every time an action contradicted a claimed principle, the audience felt it. There was no room left for doubt. And yet, rather than respond with substance, the target of his words shifted, stammered, and tried to regain footing. But it was too late. There was no shouting match, because only one person came to speak the truth, the other came to perform. And when performance meets reality, there's only one winner. The senator didn't lean on emotion, didn't appeal to his base, didn't try to rally applause. He relied on what had already happened, what the public had seen, heard, and experienced. He brought the receipts, calmly and clearly. The spectacle, as it were, turned into a masterclass in restraint. Every sentence added weight, every fact dragged the argument further into collapse. What began as a typical partisan clash quickly shifted into something more painful to watch. One side disarming itself with every flimsy reply, while the other stood unwavering, unmoved, and unshaken. It wasn't just one or two moments of brilliance. It was the entire exchange, from start to finish. The confidence, the composure, the way each line followed another with such precision, it felt less like political theater and more like a courtroom cross-examination. Not one meant to entertain, but to expose. And expose it did. No yelling. No chaos. Just cold, calm clarity. It's rare in the political world to see someone choose substance over spectacle and win the room without theatrics. But that's exactly what happened. The senator didn't need to win over the crowd. The truth already had. And that truth, delivered with quiet force, left no escape route. The one being questioned had no cover, no place to retreat, except silence or deflection. That's when the audience realized this wasn't a debate at all. This wasn't two equals locked in ideological battle. This was a reminder that facts, when delivered by someone unafraid to use them, are the most powerful force in any room. And when wielded with discipline, they don't just win the moment, they end it. There's a specific kind of silence that settles in a room when the truth finally arrives. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand attention. It just stands there, undeniable. That silence fell like a curtain the moment he got up and walked out. Not with dignity, not with purpose, but with that telltale look that comes when someone realizes they've just lost a fight they didn't even see coming. The walk wasn't brave. It was an exit born out of exposure. Because when the truth shows up, the liars leave. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Everything had been going according to plan. The script was clear. Posture, accuse, dominate the airwaves, and spin every challenge into another victim narrative. The usual formula. But the moment the senator asked that one unexpected question, the whole performance began to unravel. Not because it was confrontational, but because it cut too close. It wasn't loud. It was honest. And honesty has a way of making pretenders panic. The question was simple, but it peeled away the protective layers built over years of political deflection. It wasn't a trap. It wasn't even meant to humiliate. It was just real. And sometimes that's enough. Because when someone's whole platform is built on controlling the narrative, a single unfiltered moment can feel like a wrecking ball. That's exactly what happened. There was a visible shift. First in the posture, then in the voice, then in the eyes. Gone was the bravado. Gone was the confidence. In its place, defensiveness, irritation, and something far more telling. Fear. Not the kind that makes a person tremble, but the kind that makes them retreat. Not from danger, but from truth. And in a room full of people trained to recognize weakness, it didn't go unnoticed. He didn't try to answer. He didn't even try to deflect convincingly. He just stood up and left, as if walking out could erase what had just been said. As if leaving the room could make people forget the question, the silence that followed, and the image of a man who had no answer. But no one forgot. The exit said everything the words refused to. That's the thing about truth. It doesn't wait to be invited. It doesn't ask permission. When it's spoken clearly, without apology or spin, it has a way of commanding the room. And when the truth confronts someone who's spent years avoiding it, the instinct isn't to fight, it's to flee. Because deep down, even the most practiced actors know when the mask has finally slipped. What happened that day wasn't a clash of ideologies. It wasn't a policy dispute. It was something far more fundamental. It was the collision of image versus integrity. One side came in armored with talking points and assumptions. The other came in with one question, and that was all it took. That's how fragile a facade really is. Just one moment of truth, and the whole illusion crumbles. He could have stayed. He could have responded. Even a poor answer would have signaled some willingness to engage. But there was nothing. No fight. No defense. Just a quick escape, leaving behind the question, the silence, and the weight of what had just been revealed. That's not strength. That's surrender. And yet, in that walkout, more was said than in the entire exchange. It spoke volumes. It told the audience everything they needed to know. Because you don't run from a lie if it's not your own. You don't flee a challenge unless you know you can't meet it. That kind of exit doesn't need a spin cycle. It doesn't get better with context. It's the clearest admission there is, one that doesn't require words at all. The senator never raised his voice. He didn't gloat. He didn't need to. He just asked the one question that shattered the script, and when that question hit, it didn't just unsettle the target, it exposed the entire act. The loudest man in the room suddenly had nothing left to say, and when the truth stood up, he sat down and then walked out. Not because he wanted to, but because he had no other move left. Sometimes the most powerful moment in politics isn't the roar of applause or a dramatic mic drop. It's the quiet exit of someone who just got exposed. No matter how many cameras are rolling, how polished the image is, or how often a message has been rehearsed, there's no script for truth. When it shows up raw and unapologetic, it doesn't need a stage. It just needs a question, clear, sharp, and rooted in reality. That day didn't end with shouting. It ended with clarity. One side brought sound bites, the other brought substance. One relied on deflection, the other on direction, and when it was all over, the difference couldn't have been clearer. One man remained seated, firm and unfazed. The other walked away, not because he was silenced by force, but because the truth offered no room for spin. That moment mattered not just because of who was in the room, but because of what it revealed. It revealed how far public trust has fallen. How the American people are no longer fooled by theatrics or swayed by titles. They want real answers to real questions. They want honesty, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. There was no headline-grabbing outburst, no viral insult, just a calm dismantling of a false narrative piece by piece. The kind of moment that doesn't need to be loud to be remembered, because truth, when it finally stands on its own, doesn't have to fight. It just has to be heard. And that's what this exchange gave America, a reminder that character still matters, that facts still matter. That somewhere beneath the noise, there are still people willing to speak plainly, to ask hard questions, and to stand their ground when the answers don't come. People who don't back down because someone walks out, who don't shift course when confronted with bluster, who keep pressing because the truth is worth it. In the end, what stood out wasn't who shouted the loudest or who stormed off first. It was who stayed calm, stayed honest, and stayed seated. It was who remembered that public service isn't about posturing, it's about accountability. And sometimes holding the line isn't about winning an argument. It's about reminding everyone watching that some principles can't be shaken, no matter how hard someone tries to walk away from them. Because truth doesn't follow anyone out the door. It stays. And in this case, it spoke louder in silence than any